Hey everyone, it's Doug. With my editor's cap on, I just wanted to give a quick heads up and apology in advance. We had some sound quality issues during our interview due to some audio feedback, but don't fret, it doesn't really take too much away from any of the conversation. Enjoy!
Hi, I'm Jennifer, and welcome to the Krewe of Japan Podcast, a weekly podcast where we take you on audio journeys through Japanese culture.
This time on Krewe of Japan Podcast.
Welcome back to our podcast. Are you looking for jobs that you're interested in and that connects with your love of Japan? This may sound like something that can only stay a dream, but we are about to share how you can make that a reality. We brought in Kasia of Ikigai Connections, who has made it her mission to connect job seekers and Japanese companies. She manages the job boards at nihongojobs.com. She graciously shares with us her knowledge of what employers are looking for.
I feel as if there are really opportunities in most every industry.
And how you can use your enthusiasm for Japan to your advantage.
By knowing some of these business manners, you can help avoid cultural faux pas, or you'll be able to know that there's kind of a misunderstanding happening.
After this episode, we hope you'll be able to take what you have learned from Kasia and start finding Japan-related jobs that interest you. So Doug and I are here today for a very important topic, and we can't do it without a special guest. So we have Kasia with Ikigai Connections. Kasia, thank you for coming on.
Oh, it is such a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, kind of give our audience a brief introduction of yourself so they kind of know what to expect in this episode.
Sure. I actually, I talk about Japanese jobs in the US and sometimes other countries via my company Ikigai Connections and my job board Nihongo Jobs. And I love this topic.
Yeah, and we're going to love it too. I think it's such a great topic because a lot of people just don't realize that you don't have to go to Japan to have an awesome job related to Japan.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so this will be great.
Yeah, and so before we jump into that, we have our icebreaker question. Since we're New Orleans based, we ask a lot of people, have you ever been to New Orleans before? And if you have, what's your fondest or funniest or whatever most unique memory? But if you haven't, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear New Orleans?
I have not had the pleasure to visit New Orleans yet. I definitely want to. And the thing that comes to mind, of course, is Mardi Gras. And I've seen the photos of what I believe is like the downtown area with like the gorgeous architecture. So that would be something that I would really like to see. And to try the soup. I just thought of that. Is jambalaya? Jumbo?
Gumbo?
Gumbo.
Gumbo.
Gumbo is a soup.
Gumbo's a soup. There
It's
you go.
a soup. I love soup. Have to try it.
Gumbo, yes.
Gumbo's
Gumbo
pretty
is
good.
delicious. I love gumbo.
It is all about the soup too. You can
Yeah,
throw
it is.
anything in there, the ingredients or whatever. I mean, okra and onions and bell peppers and stuff are the kind of the key ingredients, but like you can throw whatever else in there you want.
Nice.
And that's what it is. But yeah.
We usually get our guests to kind of give us their Japan journey. And what I mean by that is just kind of like what led to your interest in Japan and the Japanese language, and then eventually creating Ikigai Connections. Like, just kind of give us your story.
Well, thank you for asking. You know, it was kind of in high school and I never really thought this would ever go anywhere. But before you knew it, I was being asked to go on a study abroad program my senior year for 4 months. And because not many others wanted to go, it was just, please, we need to send somebody on this exchange program. So my sensei talked to my father and there you go. So I went to the middle of nowhere in Shiga Prefecture and it was so nice, cold because it was September through December. So I remember being there and I'm like, why do I have to wear this uniform that's so big on me? And because they just assumed I was taller and I'm not the tallest person. And I had to wear slippers in school and they didn't turn the heat on until November 1st. I'm like, where the heck am I? And I just wanted to go home. But then when I came back home as that 17-year-old, I was like, wow, I think something happened. My life just changed. And after that, I had to study more. I studied it in college at Boston University. I went to Kyoto for my junior year, which if you've been to Kyoto, oh my gosh, it's just the most beautiful city
Best
to live in.
place in the world.
Oh, it's just gorgeous. And the food and everything was, for me, just wonderful. So I was hooked, graduated from college, and I was like, okay, what to do next? And so I was choosing between JET or MEXT. And I decided to do mixed because I really didn't know too much of the difference. And I was like, I just need to go back. So I did that. I was in Japan for research for 1.5 years on the mixed program. And at that time, I don't think you can do this anymore. I was able to extend it and I was able to get into the same school that I was at for a graduate school program for 2 years, which is where my brain practically exploded with all the kanji and all the everything that I was learning. And I was hooked again, continually. I'm like, I'm staying here forever. Decided to get a job in the music industry where I helped organize concerts in Japan, mainly Tokyo and a couple other cities.
Nice.
And then after that, because of that, I thought I really like interpreting, translating. So I need to do that a little bit more. And I was able to find an opportunity in Poland doing Polish, English, Japanese translation because I do speak Polish. It's not as well structured, but just from what I learned growing up. While I was in Poland, I was like, hey, I'm in Europe. Let's go somewhere warmer. And I went to Italy for 1 year to do some freelance translation, continually using Japanese, and then came back home to Michigan where I worked in the auto industry. So my entire time I was searching for a job, right? And it always was difficult. Before it was mainly newspaper and then it started getting more online. But when I came back home to Michigan, I remember I was like, there's nothing on, like there used to be a website called JapaneseJobs.com. Couldn't find it. It wasn't in use. So I was like, well, maybe I'll just create my own. So that's why I started doing the whole Ikigai Connections, Nihongo Jobs thing, just focused on helping my younger me, because I know that there are some few people out there, maybe the two of you could completely agree, but we just want to use our Japanese and we just happen to not be in Japan for various reasons. Mm-hmm. And when you go to like some of the main websites to look for jobs, it's not as clear. And then I started here locally in Michigan where I'm like, there's so many companies here from Japan. We have over 500. And maybe they also don't realize the benefits of people like you and I, that we know the local area, but also have this love of Japan. And we just want to be hired by them to like work and use our skills. So that's been kind of my message. I've been sharing with job seekers that, hey, there's opportunities out there. And hey, employers, there's cool people like us here too. So that's kind of my summarized version.
So did having experience being fluent in multiple languages prior to your Japanese language study, did that help learn and pick up Japanese quicker? Or was it just a completely different language where it didn't really matter?
I really think that knowing Polish helped because of the vowels. So the a, I, u, e, o in Japanese is similar to the Polish instead of a, e, I, o, u. So for me, it was easier to learn hiragana and katakana because it sounded, I kind of read it in the Polish way.
Okay.
The other thing is that I was trying to learn Italian when I was in Italy for 1 year. And for some reason, trying to learn that fourth language was so difficult, my brain kept switching to Japanese. So when I tried to say something in Italian, I was just like, sumimasen in Japanese. So I don't know if my brain just has the capacity to just max out at 3. I've been trying to learn a little bit more of the other ones, but I do believe that for me, for these 3 languages, it was very helpful to compartmentalize my brain in those ways, but I'm not sure I can add another one to that.
I can barely do 2. So.
Yeah, so you're doing good. You're doing good.
But Polish, of course, I didn't really formally study it, so it's not really like
fair enough
Kampiki or anything. It's just what I learned growing up, so it's also a little bit different.
Well, you also mentioned upon return to the U.S., you found this job in Michigan. How long did it take for you to find that job? Because some people could be saying that it's very difficult to find these jobs related to Japan.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I'll try not to go on and on and on. But for me personally, it was actually fairly easy because I live in the middle of nowhere-ish, kind of the northern area, away from where all the Japanese companies are. So
gotcha.
I applied to only 2 main companies. I literally drove up, left my resume with them, and then both called me back for interviews because they were like, wow, we've never considered this non-Japanese person with Japanese language skills. So I was very fortunate to have only that short-ish amount of time of job searching. But the difficulties I believe that the job seekers face are that they may not know where to look and they may not know how to promote themselves. And the other issue is that the employer side they don't realize that they need us. So they're not necessarily looking for us and they're not formulating their job descriptions in a way to attract us to them. So there's a big disconnect there. So I talk to employers and say, hey, if you consider candidates like us, you can add in the job description, hey, Japanese language or cultural experience is helpful so that it'll help them get to work better with the expats at the companies or something, or maybe correspond with Japan. But they're still not all doing that. So that's where the miscommunication is happening. And when we look for jobs, we just don't really know what's out there. But there really is so much. There's so many Japanese companies in the US, and they all need help with with becoming successful here in the US. And again, when I talk about US specifically, this can be applied to any other country. So just focusing for our local area for now.
Speaking of Ikigai Connections, it seems like a great resource for those who are looking for jobs that are involving Japan. You got your website, they can kind of look at job postings that you're reaching out to companies and trying to help them formulate those so that they're there. But can you give us a little bit more of a rundown of what people can expect from Ikigai Connections and Nihongo Jobs in helping them with their job search process?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. The ikigaiconnections.com portion is just like a blog. So I have a lot of resources. I had some great interns who helped me out during the pandemic, and they put together these resource pages. So if anybody wants a ton of free resources on finding a job, whether it's in Japan or in the US, there's lists of recruiters. There's a lot of online resources to like a bunch of podcasts like yours, or apps that help you learn the language, or YouTube channels that talk about Japan and the culture. So there's a lot of free stuff that people can go there and check out. Everything is basically free for the job seekers. And then on the nihongojobs.com, the job board specifically, also free to job seekers. They can go and they search for their state or whatever location they want. I have on average about maybe 3,300 job ads from the United States there, but the ones that I specifically help with the employers directly are the ones that are featured. So those are the ones that I really try to promote and say like, hey, there's this great company here in my local area. And I try to share it with like the universities and people who, the alumni from these programs saying, hey, these companies are very much open to people who maybe studied Japanese or went on the JET program. And maybe they don't have the lingo yet to work in a business setting because it's really nerve-wracking. You don't really learn that kind of business language skills, or even if you learned it, it's hard to like actually use them. A lot of these companies will be open to being like, all right, let's have this person come in and we can train them on the job, and they can start to slowly use their Nihongo or their Japanese cultural skills. So that's kind of like what I'm trying to focus on. So for the job seekers, there's lots of things that I'd like to offer. And if anybody has questions, they can absolutely reach out that way.
And do you help with any other kind of resourcing? So like, I know you say, introducing people to jobs. Do you help with resume building? Do you help with anything that they would need for seeking the job?
I do have 2 online programs called Japanese Jobs 100 and Japanese Jobs 200. I don't really promote them as often because I'm working on kaizening them, improving them a bit. So JJ 100 is more like the basics of job seeking, how to prepare your resume and how to search for jobs and cover letters and interviewing. And that's something that's available at a small cost. And then Japanese Jobs 200, I just did my very first beta trial last September in 2022, which worked out very well. It's for people who, when they actually do have a job at a company, what they can do on their own to prepare and work on their business Japanese, whether it's, from basic level and on up, how they can communicate in meetings, how to support expats, things like that. So I do have those services. But when it comes to like resume writing and reviewing, or like, I don't offer that. I just recommend other people. They're actually former JETs who do that, as well as like a recruiting kind of service. I don't do the recruiting. I just help share other recruiters so people can reach out directly. It's kind of I wanted to help everybody in the beginning, but now I've gotten to about 12,000 followers and I can't help everybody. So, So I just try to do it more like a self-service type model.
So what is your favorite business Japanese phrase that means absolutely nothing?
お世話になっております It's very hard to translate. And I guess my next one would be どうぞよろしくお願いします because you can use it anywhere. So beginning of an email, end of an email.
Right. And I think that's the hardest part when it comes to the business Japanese, because I didn't really study that and I never had to use it. Even when I was on the JET program, I had emails that I had to write for certain things, but never actually used, formal Japanese or business Japanese, nor was there ever the expectation that I was supposed to.
Right.
So I never really had the chance to learn it and do it. But for this, we've had to reach out to some of our Japanese guests that we tried to get on. It didn't work out. But I had to write a couple business Japanese emails, and I was just like Googling basically like, how do I write this? What is the proper way to open a formal email? So it's tough. It really is. I mean, English is hard too, though.
Of course.
I write so much fluff in my emails when I'm typing them for work. It's it's probably like maybe 2 sentences of actual meat. The other stuff is just kind of like softening the blow or whatever, like greetings, salutations.
And you're right, because it's one thing to say that you learn another language, but to use it in a business setting is a whole other level, whether it's a jet learning the Japanese or it's a Japanese person coming to the US and learning American business standard. It's just so difficult.
Like you're saying, like some sentences don't even, like you can use them front, back, wherever, but then you spend so much time translating, you're like, oh, wait, what is, I'm reading, going through it, and I'm like, okay, this has nothing to do with the actual like important part of the email, the stuff that I'm wanting to read. This is just like the standard triple line of greetings and stuff. So
yeah, no, for sure. I remember when I was working with a Japanese university and I had to like try and read the emails. I'm just like, where's the point? Like they would first talk about the weather and then they would talk about the tourism, and then I'd be like, okay, but where's the point? And then all of a sudden you'd be like, oh, and by the way, and I'm just like, okay, here it is.
yeah, it's so different. But then the opposite way too, that they'll look at our emails and be like, wow, that's so
direct
to the point.
yeah.
Yeah, so that it's the fine balance, right? Trying to understand, maybe if I send someone an email right now, I'd be like, oh, I heard the cherry blossoms are gorgeous right now. All right, here's a question I have for you or something. Just kind of.
I've actually done that in
I've
other
done that
emails,
too.
like where I'm like, oh my God, what has happened to me? Like no one cares about the weather over here. They just like want to know the status of this, like document or whatever it is.
Right. Right. And, even if we didn't realize that was important in an email, they would still be fine with it because they understand they're dealing with foreign culture. So, but the thing that I often tell people is that if you do have that, it just kind of adds a little bit of a, wow, this person wrote me an email.
Yeah, like a personal touch.
A little personal touch. Yeah. Or, wow, they're studying a little bit of Japanese. Oh, wow, they wrote, yoroshiku onegaishimasu as a greeting. Like, that's kind of a little brownie point that, you can get.
Well, to get back onto the topic of job searching, there are probably many people who, want to work in an industry that's related to Japan, but for a variety of reasons, they're unable to relocate to Japan, whether that's like a health issue or maybe they have family issues that they can't leave. So like, when people are searching for these Japan-related jobs here in their home country, what are the typical industries and fields that you found that these Japan-related jobs are available?
I feel as if there are really opportunities in most every industry.
Really?
So, yeah. And for example, in Michigan, we have a strong manufacturing industry. There's a lot of automotive suppliers here. And so every company that's involved with them, they have opportunities for all sorts of roles, whether it's, engineering or accounting or customer support or sales. But I've also seen outside of Michigan, once with the pandemic, I started to expand to other states. There's a lot of like banking in New York, for example. I know the West Coast has a lot, the Silicon Valley, there's more startups and all kinds of, whether it's medical or even just recently, there was cross-cultural training programs that were open to people who would like to instruct about Japanese, English, whether it's language or just cultural teachings. There's just a lot out there. So it's not just the Japanese companies, it's also the non-Japanese companies in the US who need somebody to help them with like their Japanese client. So there was one recently about, women's supporting with women's health for a non-Japanese company that had Japanese clients, and they just needed somebody to speak Japanese with people. Now, the trickiest thing is that a lot of these companies, when they write these descriptions, they write that you have to be fluent or you have to be, bilingual. And so even though some of us may have spent a few years in Japan, I feel as if, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I feel as if a lot of us kind of get more humble the more we study. So we know the intricacies of Japanese, and we would see a job description that would say you need to be fluent. I probably wouldn't consider myself fluent. So I keep telling these or employers saying, listen, if you want somebody to help you with your Japanese clients or your expats or customers, let's talk about exactly the language level that you're looking for. There are times when it says bilingual, but I promise you, even somebody who knows the Japanese culture and has lived there for a while and knows basic greetings would be able to, if they have the gumption to learn more, to join this company and just with their background and their love of being that bridge between two cultures, they really can do so much within that company. So that's kind of my battle that I'm kind of trying to fight right now for all of us, because having these crazy restrictions on how fluent you are is just going to affect, you're not going to find the candidates for it.
Well, you limit your pool.
Oh, yeah.
I personally, I mean, I'm not fluent by any means, but
Neither
I can get by.
Yeah.
And I realize sometimes that when I'm talking to people or like watching a show or something like that, I realize I know more than I do sometimes, but not always. Like there are times when I'm like, okay, I'm lost in the words. My mind starts to wander because I don't pick up on like a sentence and it throws me off and I'm out. You know?
Yeah, I think this is time for a good story. I do want to share this because I think it's really important, and I think our listeners could really benefit from it. So it's nice that you mentioned the word fluency, because I talk about it all the time on a personal level, that I hate that word. Because what does it mean? Does it mean like, how fluent are you? Now, I like to use the word I know Japanese, because it doesn't mean that I know this certain amount or this certain amount. It just means I know Japanese.
I can say arigato.
But no, seriously. So like, I remember, oh my God, this was so long ago. I wasn't even working at the current job that I'm working at now. But I saw a job opening. It was very temporary. It was like a one-day thing. And they wanted to hire someone who knew Japanese to help with Japanese visitors come to like this conference. You know, I'm not fluent in Japanese, but I feel like this is something that I could do with my level of Japanese. I don't think it's going to be hard. So I applied, and they actually wanted to talk to me and like get an interview. So I was like, okay, great. So I go in for the interview, and it turns out they actually really didn't want anyone with fluency. They didn't care. They were like, we just need someone in this area to help us guide these people at the conference. And so I was like, I think I know enough Japanese to where I can like guide and help Japanese people if they need help. And they're like, great, you're hired. Like, it was very fast, very quick, like no questions asked, honestly. And so I was like, okay, great. So the day comes where I have to go to the conference and, you know, table and help. And so literally I only used like a few Japanese phrases. I used like, kochira dozo, and like, you know, this way, please. And like, cause they, you know, they come to the table, they sign up saying that they're, you know, they were at the conference. And then, you know, I guided them to the room that was where they needed to go. If someone asked like, where's the bathroom, you know, show them, you know, this is where it is. And the only time I actually had to like speak Japanese was when they asked me, oh, your Japanese is so good, even though I only said like those very few words. And so in Japanese, I had to explain like how I learned Japanese, how I went and studied abroad in Japan over the summer, and now I, you know, still keep up my Japanese as much as possible. And, you know, they were super impressed. But literally, I only had to use kochira dozo so many freaking times. And that's all it took. Like, that's all it literally took. I did not need to be quote unquote fluent in Japanese in order to do this simple one-time job. And it paid really well too. So
when they told you your Japanese is so good, you should have said, just wait till you see how I use my chopsticks.
That's true.
Yeah, it is true.
Oh my goodness, Jennifer, that is such a great example. And it's something that I don't think a lot of us are empowered to, like, I want to empower people to say, listen, if you see something that is really intriguing to you, just kind of role, go for it. And maybe you need to educate the person on what this actually could mean. Because I've spoken with a lot of HR representatives, and maybe not all of them have studied a foreign language, and most of them have not studied Japanese. So they don't understand the intricacies involved. And to them, it might just mean, oh, we want a bilingual person, because they don't realize that there are so many levels there. So they just say it because it's something that is, this role is dealing with Japanese people. Let's just add it with this one sentence to the JD, the job description. And so I keep wanting to tell people, hey, you have to kind of fight for this sometimes, or at least put it into a cover letter. Mention that I see you're looking for a bilingual person, but please let me share with you my time in Japan was this many years. I did this, and just kind of like promote yourself. And then they'll be like, oh, that's interesting. And maybe just like you experienced with that opportunity, then they'll consider you, because they probably have no idea that it's just kochira dozo over and over and over. To them, they're just like mind boggled that you even understand what people are asking about.
Well, yeah, because the guy that put up the job post with the recruiting company, he was like, you know what to do, right? I'm like, I mean, yeah, it's not difficult. And like, so he would see that I kept, talking to Japanese people and helping them. And he's like, you're doing great. Yeah. Just keep doing what you're doing. I'm like, you don't know what to do. Like, cause he doesn't know Japanese.
Right.
That's why he requested like people to help him.
Yeah.
And with this recruiting service. And I just remember when I saw the job, I was like, I didn't think of it as a sense of like, I didn't ask the question, am I good enough for this job? I asked the question of like, I personally want to practice my Japanese and this is a way to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We weren't born with Keigo. We weren't born knowing how to write an email in Japanese. We have to try it.
Yeah.
And hopefully, and I also ask this of employers, like if they could just be patient and just give us a little bit of time. Because if we have the desire, I think that is already so much more that they can expect from somebody else.
You had mentioned earlier about expanding your scope of jobs from just not only in Michigan and your immediate surrounding areas, but kind of around the country, in and out of Japan. The pandemic itself has kind of put an emphasis on remote work, which I think opens a lot of jobs up for people who are, let's say, New Orleans based, who are looking for a job, but the job's based out of California or Seattle or Michigan.
Yep.
Have you found that a lot of Japanese companies in both Japan, but also Japan-related jobs abroad, have they embraced that same virtual commute via home office, or are they still very much looking for someone to come in physically to the office?
Oh, this is such a good question. And I was closely following all of the news regarding this during the pandemic, because in Japan, for example, I'm sure we all have heard when it was, at the start, the employees were nervous that they had to, they had a hanko something. They had to go to the office just to put a stamp on a document or do something that way. And after that, it started to become more like, oh, we have to do more things online. So companies like DocuSign and those equivalents started becoming a little bit more like, wow, we can actually sign online and move things along quicker. So, and then with people trying to work from home in Japan itself, it was very difficult. I think a little bit more difficult than in the US because there's such smaller homes. Maybe they weren't equipped to fully work from home in such a manner. And so I really, after that, I can't really speak too much about Japan, but in the US, I know that I've spoken with many companies who, shikata ga naku, they had to become more remote during the pandemic. And then once things started to kind of get a little bit better, they were requesting more, hey, all right, let's start coming back into the office. So when it comes to here in Michigan manufacturing, it was kind of like, we're going to start returning back to in the office. Because
the nature of some jobs, you have to be on site.
And then some companies, that are ones that have positions that you can do off site, I think even there, they were still kind of like, and this I'm going to say more about the Japanese run companies as well as American run companies. I get the impression that they still want people to come into the office because of communication, the meetings, just having people at least a couple days on site. But job seekers are really into hybrid and remote. So there's this, not a clash, but there's this, it's kind of like, I think companies are working through it because of this demand on job seekers to work from home in such a way. They appreciate it. It's easier. It's, they get to stay home and work, especially if you're more of an introverted kind of person. You get to focus without, chit-chatting and stuff. And so I hear things all over the place. I think it's a big struggle. And I think lots of things are going to start getting more defined going forward, which could be different depending on the industry and the roles. It could also affect the salaries because that, if an employee really wants to work from home, then maybe it'll be a more coveted position and potentially lower salary. I don't know. But the other thing that we need to keep in mind is that some companies have to consider the legal aspect. So maybe they are only able to open up their remote roles to particular individuals to individuals in particular states. Mm-hmm. So you'll see some fully remote roles that are technically you have to be living in the US to apply for, or technically have to be in a certain region of the US. So that's where things get a little tricky on the legal aspect.
Okay. My work is I do remote work for IT.
Nice.
I'll not get too detailed into that, but yeah, so it's the same thing though. Like one of my clients is up north. In the past, I've had clients all over, and it's definitely more prevalent now in the industry I work in.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, I was like, I have some friends that work in Japan, that their companies were based in Tokyo. And then after the pandemic hit and they all were kind of forced into remote work, some of those offices even consolidated and sold off all of they liquidated all their like furniture and they sold everything off. And they said, okay, we're just going to work remote indefinitely.
Yeah.
We don't even have an office anymore. So I think a lot of companies had a cost-cutting measure. We don't have to pay the rent in Tokyo for an office.
And they were also paying for employees to commute to work.
Exactly. Yeah. Sometimes, not all. I was wondering about here, though.
Yeah. I feel it really could be, it's interesting to see how this will all play out, and I'm sure it'll continue changing. But I feel that many companies I'm speaking with are like, all right, we were fully remote, but let's kind of pull it back a little bit to at least a couple of days, which changes things, because people who were fully remote, maybe they were in a different location or moved to a different location.
Right.
Now they're just like, well, I guess I can't go back because I'm living so far away. I can't commute anymore the 2 days a week or something. So but the other thing also, and this may be a minor point, it's also the idea of confidentiality. And I think my guess, and please don't quote me on this, I know this is on a podcast for everybody, but I feel that a lot of Japanese companies could also be a little bit more conservative in terms of like how many laptops they give to employees and who's working from home, because of the chance that it could be, once it's outside of the office, you've got the chance that some of that data could go somewhere. And I get it, but I think that they're a little bit more conservative in that regard. But Doug, you would know much better about this. Being in the IT world.
No, it's definitely a concern, and there's a lot of measures that I think a lot of companies try to put in place, but you can't protect everything as much as you want. Yeah, someone can accidentally send an email to their personal email, and then all of a sudden, data's out in the wild.
Yep.
So yeah, it's definitely a concern though. Like the confidentiality is definitely. I could see why some companies would be hesitant to doing that kind of work.
Well, to get back into the topic of Japanese language, because I keep bringing it up because it's kind of important for the topic that we're talking about, because that's probably one of the biggest concerns. These Japanese job openings, one of the requirements is that they're saying fluent in Japanese. And a lot of people, probably like yourself and myself and Doug, are like, we're not fluent, or we don't consider ourselves fluent, because we're thinking fluent and we're thinking, oh, they want us to be like, right, we know everything, and we don't. That's so hard to do.
Right.
The Japanese job-related jobs, do you feel like most of them actually don't mean fluency? They just want you to have some kind of language level? Because I know a common thing, especially in this state, because in Louisiana, we don't have that many opportunities to learn Japanese. What would you give advice for that? Because I feel like a lot of people at that level of Japanese, and they're like, oh, well, that's nowhere near fluency, but it's still something.
Absolutely. I would say that a good majority of job descriptions out there are requesting something that they may not need, a level of Japanese that they may not need.
Yeah.
But they don't know the nuances. And so if it is customer facing, let's say it's, I'm just going to bring up the manufacturing example again. Let's say you're working in a Japanese subsidiary here in Michigan, and the job role is just working within that company, maybe working with an expat internally. Then if it's internal, I would not require any advanced level, because it's a teammate. You can work together. You can hash things out. There's lots more to communication than just words. And you can use online tools to translate. You can get in a meeting and just kind of, talk through things, numbers on the wall or on the whiteboard, things like that. If it is customer facing and it's a very, conservative customers that require you to be practically Japanese, then that's a whole other story. But if it's a customer that has American and Japanese, and you're probably going to be speaking to them in English, then I don't think you need to have an advanced level, because you are understanding the cultural nuances, and you kind of maybe you make mistakes in your Japanese language, but you could be speaking to both English and Japanese sides of that customer and be very well understood. And even you have that extra knowledge because you know how the Japanese customer may be thinking. So basically, I think that you just need to dig into the details a little bit more to find out really why. And that will be up to us, the job seekers, to do that. So let's say 3 semesters of college education, and let's add a little bit of a study abroad. Maybe they went to Japan for a month for study abroad. Mm-hmm. Just by knowing how things are in Japan how the culture is, how the trains run on time, how signs work and food and all that stuff. I think just having the cultural like bowing to people and presenting a meishi, and I think those people could be of great help in any kind of Japanese related company, just because they have the basic fundamental knowledge. They've been to Japan and they have at least hiragana, katakana, and maybe a few kanji. If they have the desire to keep improving, for them it would be like a super awesome opportunity to work at a Japanese company, because it's kind of like learning Japanese on the job too, right?
Of course, that's how it kind of would be. Yeah.
Right. And then for the employer, the benefits to them is that you've got an employee who has the desire to learn and grow and improve. So I think it's a win-win for both sides. So the people with the 3 semesters of college, I think they should try and apply and kind of promote themselves and what they can actually do and how they can help be that cultural bridge within the company. If it's, again, very I'm like a legal company that requires, advanced levels of knowledge of Japanese plus some legal stuff, that's more specific. You may need to have a little bit more Japanese background for that. But again, it really does depend on the company culture, if they're willing to train people who are willing to stay there. Because a lot of times the Japanese companies struggle with people who kind of like what's average in America to leave every 3 or so years. They would really like someone to stay there longer. So if you see a company that you really see yourself wanting to be at for a while, and it's like convenient, it's close to home, or maybe it's a remote hybrid situation, you're like, this company is like awesome, promoting to them that you like their mission and you want to stay there and you can learn and grow, I think is something that we can all do to promote ourselves, regardless of the number of semesters we had.
Yeah, that kind of leads into where we're going next with presenting yourself and selling yourself as the potential candidate or the candidate for the job.
Yeah.
That comes with resume prepping and preparing for job interviews. And you had mentioned earlier you have your JJ 100 and 200 that you're launching. 200, I think you said you did your beta last year. Yep. Without going too deep into the weeds of like your seminars and stuff, do you have any recommendations for applicants when it comes to highlighting something? And maybe we've already talked about it, highlighting your experiences living in Japan for even a short period of time or whatever your language ability may be. But what would you recommend highlighting for someone applying for a Japan-related job, but maybe they wouldn't highlight that for a non-Japan-related job?
Right. I think there's 3 things I would recommend. The first one is within the resume, obviously have the word Japanese there, have, maybe some extra courses, maybe explain the study abroad program a little bit. That would be helpful for both the ATS, the computers that read your resume, if companies use it, or the human HR representative who's reading the resumes. They can skim through and be like, oh, there's a Japanese section here. That's great. Of course, you're not going to go into such depth regarding your Japan experience for a different company that has nothing to do with Japan. So that's what I would add to it. But for me, and I know this is the second thing is the cover letter. And I know there's so much out there about like cover letters are dead. I really believe that cover letter in any form, whether it's an actual piece of paper that you send in with your resume, or if it's the email body, or if it's within the ATS requirements, there's like a paragraph where you can explain yourself a little bit. It's your opportunity to promote yourself. So while you are doing research on the company and checking out the job description, not just blindly applying and say, hey, I want this job because you sound like a Japanese company, but really being like, hey, what can I offer to this company? And the person reading your cover letter is a human and they kind of want to feel special too. So if they get a cover letter that says, hey, your company really appeals to me because of the mission that I read on your website, and this job opportunity would be great because ABC and aligns with my desire to blah, 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 like they'll be like, hey, this candidate actually looked at our website and actually read this job description. Hey, bonus points right there. So that's like bare minimum that I recommend. But the third thing I recommend, and this is something that doesn't have a calculable ROI, is networking. So whether it's online or in-person networking. So if, let's say you're interested in cultural organizations like your local Japan America Society that you are very closely associated with. If you're a new college grad who's just like, hey, that's the coolest thing, I'd love to be a part of that, start going to these events, whether they're online or in person, kind of like just go and start meeting these people and getting to know about this organization, or follow these organizations or companies on social media and kind of see what they're up to, and maybe start liking them so that your name starts popping up on these social media reps' radar, and just kind of start getting involved that way, just to show that, hey, I'm part of this community and I'm really interested. And And you never know what could happen with that. It's just very, I know it's hard for people who are so shy or just don't want to like get too involved and go out in public, but networking really is one of the best ways to get these jobs. And in fact, I would say that, I forget the percentage, there's a number of jobs that don't even really go to the job boards because they're the ones that start with relationships, and you get to know somebody and be like, wow, this person would be really good for our organization, and something new comes up. Hey, John, we have this thing opened up. What are your thoughts? And maybe that's where opportunities can happen before the world knows about these opportunities.
Well, before, you did mention a candidate knows a lot about Japanese culture, but may not know the Japanese language. How would you put your knowledge of Japanese culture into a resume? Because that's such an odd thing, I feel, to put on a resume. Like, well, I wouldn't even know how to start with that.
Honestly, I think there's so much that person can say that they wouldn't expect to be important. So even knowing that you have to add san to a person's name is something that not many people realize is important. So you would be able to say that you know how to address people, even if you don't speak the language. Knowing how to, I'm sure everybody in any class kind of has an idea of how to give a business card, just saying that they understand the importance of business manners. And maybe they'll know that by staying in Japan for a little bit, that you don't do this or you don't do that, or you say this or da-da-da. Like even knowing the concept that bowing is important, like those basic business manners are not what your typical American working in a Japanese company who's never known anything Japanese, they would never know that. And so you would be able to say that, but just by knowing some of these business manners, you can help avoid cultural faux pas, or you'll be able to know that there is kind of a misunderstanding happening. So you could pinpoint that there's something here that, wait, hold on 1 second. Let's talk about this. Maybe we need to discuss this a little bit more, because most Japanese people do understand the English. So you can just kind of be that like helper or observer. Yeah. Or if you know that there's a huge miscommunication happening, you'd be like, whoa, let's stop here. Or if you think your American counterparts are being rude in a way that they don't realize they're being rude, you could be like, hey, don't do that, So there's a lot that a person with just basic Japanese cultural knowledge can offer a company.
I never thought of that.
So would you, because I don't want to say it's a hobby because it's not, but I would always offer, like, because I took a lot of classes, business communication, like resume building, crafting resumes and stuff. And
nice.
I would help people with their resumes.
Nice.
With the industry I work in, I'm constantly like tweaking my resume, sending it out to recruiters and stuff like that. So would you have like a separate section of your resume, like skills? Because obviously you wouldn't necessarily put it if you haven't had a Japanese job before, or you haven't had relevant coursework. For this, would it be like a skills section of your resume, or like kind of like bullet points at the top before you dive into your education and your work experience?
Yeah, like knowledge of Japanese business culture or something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's many ways of doing this, and I've seen it in, like, some people still write an objective on their resume. So maybe in there could be a little sentence about business culture or language skills. Under the education, you could clarify let's say you did a study abroad or your courses, you could just add those few bullet points underneath that are specific to Japanese. Or skills, of course, you could add a little bit more about, what exactly you do know about the language that maybe doesn't go in the education section. So
yeah. Well, and that reminds me too, like at the end of the JET program, we had like a leavers conference that we had to go to. I think it was in Yokohama. And we didn't have to go, but if you wanted to, you can get out of work for a day or two. So you can go do that and hang out with a bunch of friends and, go enjoy Yokohama. But part of that was trying to market yourself post-JET and how to take some of these skills and repackage them into transferable skills that you can use in a non-Japanese school work environment.
Right.
And you'd be surprised how you could do that. Like, I manage 40 people in a room. I had to constantly manage and control a high intense setting. Or, like there's ways to reword. Or I worked in an international workplace where I had to day-to-day communicate in 2 languages.
Absolutely.
There's so many things that you could do that can transfer over to different industries. That it's, even though I was teaching English as an assistant language teacher, it still was stuff that I can use just in terms of adaptability. You got to adapt on the fly all the time when you're teaching in English or in Japanese. So it's one of those things that I use that for even mine. I'm like, I've worked in diverse workplaces where I had to adapt on the fly and pull examples out of your head from that. And I think that's one of my things that I took away most from that Leavers conference was being able to repackage and translate those skills that you acquired while teaching and move that over to, a non-teaching industry.
It's so important. And I'll have so many things to say about what you just mentioned. I don't want to go off topic too much, but two things. First of all, you really can tweak your resume in such a way that will promote what you did based on the wording you use. If you just wrote like taught English, that's kind of, okay, fine. That's fine, right? But then what you just said, working in a diverse environment with multiple languages is something that's a little bit more kakui, like, oh wow, this is much cooler.
Yeah,
so that
sounds way more sophisticated.
Yeah, you can do lots of that, and of course, being mindful of using the important words that that resume readers will want to see.
Yeah.
But the second point is that what you just mentioned, jets and when they come back home, again specifically to the U.S. right now, they really struggle with making sure that their resume is now adaptable to another job, because so I absolutely recommend that they join these leavers conferences, because it will help them so much. If it's optional, I would like to require it, so they do that, because when they come back here, they just have this resume that says I was in Japan for a few years, and a lot of recruiters or HR people will have no idea what the JET program is. So they don't think that there's like, oh, they were just on a study abroad for many years, so they're kind of out of the loop, and they're only available to do an entry-level position, which isn't true. A lot of times you have so much experience that you've gained in Japan that it's not just entry-level, it's a little bit more advanced that you can do if you have the ambition to kind of, learn about this new industry or whatever. You can absolutely transfer these skills, at a minimum soft skills.
So that's actually a common complaint. Something I've heard from a lot of jets that do come back, they can't find work, or they aren't sure like what to do. Because even me, I had 4 months before I found a job.
Yeah.
That's short compared to other people. But I applied and failed and applied and failed. I had multiple times where things didn't work out. Yeah, it's really one of those things, how to market yourself after, and being open to other stuff. Because I think a lot of times people do come back and kind of silo themselves into one train of mind, and like, this is what I'm going to do. What I'm working in now, I had zero interest, or I never even imagined working in the industry I'm working in now, back when I was on JET.
Yeah. But on top of it, if you are thinking of applying from Japan as your program is ending, that's that's difficult. One thing that's difficult. Very hard, but also, when you come back, and I'm sure you talked about this in one of your previous episodes, the reverse culture shock is real, and your identity changes, and you really don't know what you want to do anymore. Yeah. Because it's a life-changing experience.
Well, before we wrap up this episode, I just want to make sure our listeners get every ounce of advice that you could possibly have for them. So, do you have any tips for our listeners who are maybe dreaming of working in Japan or in a field involving Japan, but maybe don't know where to start or what to do to kick things off? What are your final pieces of advice for them?
Well, first of all, I would say to keep dreaming, and nothing is too crazy, because we have these skills that are kind of different, right? We're kind of unique now in what we can offer to some companies. So really, if it doesn't exist out there, what you want to do, see if you can create it. I know that sounds crazy, and it sounds a little bit like, really, how can I do this? But it is very possible. Just a side note, I have a bunch of senpai success stories on my blog with these people who have done the wildest things with their Japanese language that they kind of fell into or created or offered benefits to companies, and it just became their thing. So nothing is too crazy. And if there is, I have a whole Japan resource page for anybody who's interested in finding a job in Japan, and I can share that with you afterwards. It's just a list of recruiters, a list of places you can network, and some school language programs that can help you get to Japan first, so you can look for a job. And then in the US side, obviously, with my job board, if anybody's looking for something, I think that would be a good place to start. But just like we talked about earlier, don't be thrown off by these potentially crazy requests in the job description. Think about the role and think if it's something that you really want to do, and if your skills would be applicable to it. And even if there's a bit of a gap in your skills, try and promote yourself and say that you can learn to get to that level. I think it's going to be huge. So
the worst they can say is no.
The worst thing, and I know it's so time consuming and it's so stressful, but sometimes if you personalize, you won't know.
Right. You got to shoot your shot.
Exactly.
Well, I loved this topic. I feel we got so much out of it. I'm pretty sure 100% our listeners are going to get a lot out of this episode. So thank you for coming on. But before we wrap up, for sure, I know they can find you on Ikigai Connections and Nihongo Jobs, the websites, but can they find you on social media anywhere? share? Give us all your tags.
Everything is basically from those two websites. You can see my social media, but I am the most active on LinkedIn. I'm not as active on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, but I do post there kind of when I can.
No, but that's a good thing to mention too,
When it comes to recruiter-based work, you want to have a LinkedIn profile.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And if I may add, when people use LinkedIn, not many people know this or do this, but please personalize your message when you send a connection request to somebody. Mm-hmm. It's so helpful to just kind of think of it as like going to a networking event and going around the room with your business card and just kind of like throwing them at people. That's kind of like the connection request on LinkedIn. But if you personalize it, it's literally saying, hello, my name is Kasia. Nice to meet you. So I often tell people to do that. If you don't know how to do it, just Google personalized LinkedIn connection request and they'll be able to know that.
Nice. Yeah. And, can any of our listeners expect anything in the future of your websites? Or I know you said that you just had the beta of the second level. Do you have any kind of information on that they could, really look forward to?
Yes, I am going to be creating my Japanese Jobs 200, the actual course. So it's available online for people to do anytime they want from anywhere. And my goal is to offer those as live cohorts as well in case people want to interact and have like a classroom setting of like 5 to 8 people online, but that will be a little bit later in the year. So
awesome.
It's a lot of ideas. I just have to focus and get one done at a time.
When you got it live, let us know. We'll share that out.
Absolutely.
Our social media
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. Doug and I have always wanted to do like a recruiting job episode, and you really helped us, bring this idea to life. So thank you so much for coming on.
This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. My pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Krewe of Japan podcast. In today's episode, we got the inside scoop from Kasia of Ikigai Connections on Japan-related jobs that you can find online using her resources. Check out the job boards and see if there's a job that seems perfect for you. Share your Japan-related job search stories with us on our social media. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Krewe of Japan Podcast. That's KREWEOFJAPAN Podcast. While you're there, follow and give us a like. Let us know how you're enjoying the podcast and maybe even drop us some hints on other episode topics you'd love to hear from us. But that's it for today. Until next time.